What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Day 1 and Day 2 metagames of Oceania International Championships 2020, and I'll also be focusing on the conversion rates, what decks made it from Day 1 to Day 2, and at what rate they made it there. Big thanks to Arcanine Labs for putting out the Day 1 meta report, which is such a valuable resource for analyzing metagames and seeing how many of which decks were played. So before we go into all of this analysis, shout out to PotonStore.com, your best place to get PTCGO codes, and you can use code CELIO for 5% off. And shout out to FlipsideGaming.com, where I write free articles, and you can use code CELIO, all caps, for 10% off on your next order, $10 or more. So just a quick look at the Day 1 metagame, a nice physical representation to show you what decks were played and how many of them were there at Day 1. We had just over 400 Masters in the Oceania International Championships 2020. And this is nice if you wanted to see which decks were played that might not have been on stream or didn't make Day 2. So like Morpeko V, Snorlax VMAX, Rillaboom, some new decks that didn't make Day 2 and weren't on stream, but you can see here that they actually were played in very small amounts, but they still had some sort of showing in the Day 1 of the tournament. So, and it also allows you to compare, like ADP Zacian was wildly popular, and then some decks only had like 20 or so, like Cinccino and Abilities Art, so they still had a substantial amount, but just nowhere near ADP Zacian. And I'll have the exact numbers on the next slide, but I just wanted to give you a nice physical representation so it's not all numbers. So here we have just a few different ways to look at the data. So if you wanted to stop here and screenshot this or whatever to look at later, feel free. But this shows you in column A, we have the decks. In column B, we have the Day 1, the amount of decks that were in Day 1. So there were 132 ADP Zacians in Day 1. There were 60 Pico-Roms, 58 Mewtwo Malamars, and so on. Then in column C, we have the percentage of the meta share the deck made up of Day 1. So ADP Zacian was 32% of the field in Day 1. Pico-Rom and Mewtwo Malamar were 14%. Baby Blacephalon was 6%, and so on. In column D, we have the Day 1 to Day 2 conversion rate. So this is how, at what rate did the decks go from Day 1 to Day 2. So looking at ADP Zacian, there were 132 in Day 1. 23 of those 132 made it into Day 2, and that is a conversion rate of 17.42%. If you wanted to round it up, it's about 20%, which means roughly 1 out of 5 players that played ADP Zacian made it into Day 2. So then, of course, column E is the amount of each archetype that was in Day 2. A lot of these are 0 because not every archetype made Day 2. So ADP Zacian, it has 23 of them made Day 2, Pico-Rom, 5 of them made Day 2, and so on. In column F, we have the Day 2 percentage, so just like the Day 1 percentage. At what percentage of the Day 2 meta share did the given archetype or deck make up? ADP Zacian, there were 23 in a 49-player Day 2. That was 46% of Day 2, so a very large amount of Day 2. Pico-Rom took up 10% of Day 2, Mewtwo Malamar took up 8% of Day 2, so on. And then column G, the final column, shows how many of the deck made top 8. Of course, most of these are going to be zeros because there's only 8 spots. So ADP Zacian, there were 2 of them in top 8, Pico-Rom 0. And as I've talked about in other videos on OCIC, there was a disqualification after top 8. So the Cinccino, or before top 8 matches began, or during top 8 matches. But the Cinccino mill, there was originally 2 of them in top 8. 1 of them got DQ'd, and a third ADP Zacian moved up. I'm showing the results from before the DQ happened. So 2 Cinccino mill, 2 Zacian, 1 Mewtwo Welder, 1 Ability Zard. Or I'm sorry, 2 Mewtwo Welder, 1 Ability Zard, 1 Obstagoon. So this is just all of the data. You can look at it a couple different ways with the percentages. And we're going to go into a more focused look at the conversion rates from day 1 to day 2. So these are all 11 archetypes or decks, how I have them sorted. We have 11 different ones that made day 2. Like I said, the Mycargo GX variants, technically there was Mycargo GX Attacking and Mycargo GX Mill in day 2, which are very different decks. But the day 1 data from Arcanine Labs combined Mycargo GX and Mycargo Mill as far as I can tell. So there's really no way to know how many of each were in day 1. We know that there were 2 attacking variants in day 2 and 1 mill variant in day 2. And there were 5 Mycargo GX decks altogether in day 1. So at least 2 of those were attacking, at least 1 of those were mill. But for consistency's sake between the Arcanine Labs to this, I just combined the Mycargo GX variants. So we'll start at the top here. Up top left, Zacian ADP. There were 132 Zacian ADPs played, and 23 made it into day 2 for a 17.42% conversion rate or success rate, whatever you want to call it. So Zacian ADP was wildly popular in day 1, and with having that many spots of day 1, I think it would have been disappointing if the deck took up marginally less of day 2. So I don't think it took up an absurd amount of day 2, granted that it took up so much of day 1. So it was a hyped deck. It was seen as a safe play. It probably is the BDIF, or it's at least one of the best decks in formats, depending on how you define that or your own personal opinion. But I don't think it's very surprising that it had so much play in day 1, or that it had so much success going into day 2. It's 17.42%, a really solid success rate from having 132 of them, and roughly 1 out of 5 of the decks, or 1 out of 5 players that played the deck would make it into day 2. So that's a really good success rate, and I think it's going to encourage people to continue playing it, because that's really good odds. Of course, it's not just you can't play the deck poorly and the odds will take you there, but it's a great deck to pick. So I do think people might be a little upset by how many were in day 2, but I think it makes sense. It's not like it had 40 of them in day 1 and then 23 of them made it into day 2, and the conversion rate or success rate would be astronomical there. But also there were 49 players in day 2, 23 of it was Zacian. It was still under 50% of the day 2 representation. There were more than 10 different decks in day 2. There were 4 or 5 different decks in top 8, I believe. So it was still a very diverse field from day 1 to day 2 to top 8, and finals were 2 different decks, and neither of them were even Zacian ADP. So I do think it was very diverse. I think Zacian ADP was a great call, will continue to be a great call. And I think its conversion rate, it had a really nice conversion rate, so definitely encourages people to play it in the future. Pika Rom, there were 60 of them in day 1, 5 of them in day 2 for an 8% conversion rate. Not a horrible conversion rate, but definitely nowhere near Zacian. It also saw less than half the play Zacian did in day 1. And 5 of them made day 2, which is a solid chunk of day 2 at only 49 players. It was on the smaller side of day 2 as far as we've seen in the recent tournaments. So I think Pika Rom, this is definitely a significant conversion rate since there were so many in day 1, 60. I think it may discourage players from playing it, since there were only 5 that made day 2 and then none of them made top 8. So I do think Pika Rom, a lot of players were feeling like it was safe going in, but Zacian ADP just seems so much safer now, looking at the results from OCIC. Down to Mewtwo Malamar, 58 in day 1, so basically the same amount as Pika Rom, no significant difference, and then 4 in day 2 with a success rate of 6.90%. So Mewtwo Malamar, I definitely think was a bit disappointing. It was really hyped up. Players thought it was better than what OCIC results showed. So none of it made top 8. 4 of them made day 2, which again is a solid chunk, but just nowhere near Zacian ADP. And I think a lot of players thought Mewtwo, Malamar, and Pika Rom were on a very almost even ground as Zacian ADP, and right now it's just showing that that's not the case. But Zacian ADP was also much more heavily played in day 1. I still think Mewtwo Malamar is a solid deck, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm just trying to focus on the conversion rates and the numbers. But I think Mewtwo Malamar is going to fall off in hype, but the players that like it will still continue to play it. Its conversion rate was just not fantastic. From 58 in day 1 to only 4 in day 2, compared to, again, looking at Zacian ADP, that's the golden standard now, having 23 in day 2. I don't think any other archetype is going to come close to that in this standard format. I think Zacian ADP will probably continue to be the most played deck and the most popular deck in day 2 for the major tournaments to come, but that is just my guess. Next is Blacephalon, Unbroken Bonds, or Baby Blacephalon archetypes. I combined the ability Blacephalons and the greens Blacephalons into one. So RK9 had them separated. I just put all the Baby Blowns into one big clump. So there were 26 in day 1 and 3 in day 2 for an 11% conversion rate. I think that's really solid. 26 is still a significant amount of people to say that the conversion rate matters. Like, if you look at Magcargo GX, only 5 in day 1 and 3 in day 2 gives it a 60% success rate, but that number is hard to call significant when there was only 5 in day 2. So I like to call the numbers that are significant more on the left column here. So and then everything on the right not as significant because there were much less of them played. But anyway, Blacephalon, Baby Blacephalon, I think it performed really well. 26 played in day 1, 3 made it into day 2. I think that's a really great number at 11%. It's one of the, if not the best single prize deck in the format, so I definitely think it'll be continuing to see play just because of that. Until another single prize deck comes out, but I'm not sure that it will. So I think Baby Blowns will continue to be the most popular single prize deck since it showed that it could be successful here at OCIC. Next we got Chinchino Mill, 19 played and 3 made it into day 2 at a 15.79% conversion rate, which I think is really good. I did think it was going to see more play day 1, so I thought its conversion rate was going to be lower because I thought it was going to see a lot more play in day 1 and not be successful making it into day 2. So this one actually surprised me. There were 19 of them in day 1 and 3 in day 2, so for a pretty solid conversion rate. And 2 made it into top 8 as well. So I did think this deck was going to have a lot of hype and have a lot of people playing it, and then only a few make day 2, which would have been a poor conversion rate. But since only 19 played it and a few made day 2, the conversion rate's actually really solid. I think it's a confirmed, like a concrete archetype of our meta at the moment. But like I've said in so many of my previous videos, it's not in contention for best deck in format. It's not broken like people thought. Next we got Ability Zard, so 19 in day 1 and then only 1 in day 2 for a 5% conversion rate. Ability Zard was one of my top picks for the tournament to do well. It actually made finals, but we're not really considering what made top 8 into our percentages here. So 5% conversion rate, not really the greatest. It means 1 out of every 20 roughly will make it into day 2. So you have to decide which one you're going to look at. So 20 people played it, 1 made day 2, and then that 1 ended up getting second place. So you can weight that second place with a lot of importance, or you can say, well, so many people played it and only 1 made it that far, so I feel like it's kind of a risky play. I think both trains of thought there are viable or valid thoughts. I still think the deck is really good, but it does have a lot of variance. I think because of the way the deck is traditionally built with like 17 to 18 energy in it, your hands have a bit worse odds of being playable. So I can understand the conversion rate, but I also can understand that the one that did make it into day 2 made it so far because it seemed like a good play for the meta. Malamar without Mewtwo, so this combines the 11 Psychic Malamars and then one Malamar that was listed as other Malamar on the Arcanine Labs meta report. Actually had a pretty good success rate, so 12 were played in day 1 and then 2 were played in day 2, but with such a low amount to work with, you have to not really take the conversion rates or the success rates on this right column of decks with too much weight. So only 12 are played and 2 made day 2, which gives it a conversion rate of 16.67. But you can't really give that the same significance of Zacian ADP with just 1% higher conversion rate, but it had 132 played and 23 made it into day 2. It's such a different number there. So like I said, I'm not really counting these ones on the right as having too great of significance as far as their conversion rates go. But I will say I think it's something to look at that 3 of the 10 Mewtwo Welder made day 2, and 2 of them were Nico and Tord, so that's just a great example of really good players selecting this archetype. And even though not a lot of people played it, because really good players did, it made it really far, and one of them won the tournament. The Obstagoon is very interesting, so a lot of people hyped it up. I would say maybe 2 to 3 weeks out from the tournament, and then in the week leading up to it, people were really hating on it and saying it wasn't actually that good. 11 people did end up playing it. 1 made day 2, and something to keep in mind is that one of those, the only one that made day 2, made it into top 4. The Zacian with no ADP, I'm assuming most or all of these were Lucametal Zacian, and there was 1 Lucametal Zacian in day 2. And then also the Magcargo GX variants. I said we know that 1 of the 5 were mill, and at least 2 of the remaining 4 were attacking. So even if we said 4 people played the attacking variant and 2 of them made day 2, it honestly looks pretty good for Magcargo GX. And I do know that at least 1 of the players were a reputable Japanese player, so it kind of has the same effect of Mewtwo Welder. You can't really count the conversion rates with too much significance because there was such a low sample size, but really good players decided to play this deck and it made it fairly far and it had success, which is something to keep in mind. So you can look at only the conversion rates, you can look at which ones made top 8 and which ones won the tournament, or you can combine it a little bit of both. That's for you to decide, and I'm just supplying you with the data. So just one more time, I'll show this list with all of the archetypes on it. I'm not really sure if I was surprised by too many of the day 1 meta reports, or of too many of the day 1 meta shares from the meta report. I actually didn't think Ability Zard would be played that much. I did think somebody would be successful with it. I thought Obstagoon would be played more, and I thought Cinccino Mill would be played more, but it turns out people saying they weren't as good as they thought over like online in the week leading up to the tournament actually had an effect there, I think. Because if the tournament was 2 weeks earlier, I think you would bump up Obstagoon by like 20-30% of population day 1, and the same for Cinccino Mill. Like Obstagoon would have maybe been like 15 to 20 played, and Cinccino Mill would maybe be 30 plus played. But ADP Zacian, I think everybody expected it to be the most played. That shouldn't have really surprised anyone. And like I said, you can see the rogue decks down at the bottom. People played Charizard Braixen, Nagquag, Fossils. Some crazy stuff comes out at OCICs that just one person playing it that nobody expected to be there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will also tweet out the day 2 conversion rate graphic probably the day after this video goes live, so you can save it as an image if you wanted. If not, just go ahead and screenshot it if you wanted to save the data. Hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this in the future. I've been really appreciating all the support, and I do have some plans on the way, hopefully to be ready to launch by the time the next English set comes out. So I'm excited for that. And I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.